there's something important or interesting going on around model yachting. And certainly, it's not going to be all-inclusive, and because I kind of think of it as like a stroll through history, and stopping every once in a while when there's something important or interesting going on around model yachting. And certainly, it's not going to be all-inclusive, and because John Stout put this slide deck together, and basically he has some wonderful pictures that have been taken throughout history that have vignettes of model yachting and stuff, and we kind of use those to kind of tell the story of model yachting. And I do want to make sure everybody understands that he put a lot of work in. What people understand is that there's always been a fascination with the ocean, I think, and ships in general, since people first started realizing they could get out on the ocean and build a boat and go somewhere. And this is like a picture of an early print in which it shows kind of the huge variety of yachts and sail rigs and sizes and designs that existed. And all of these were attempts of people to capture the feeling of being out on the ocean and sailing. Now, as John and I were talking about earlier, I don't think these people were interested so much in racing at this time. What they wanted was they wanted it to look like a big boat. They wanted it to look like something that was out sailing on the ocean. And they look marvelous. Much like a lot of our yachts do today, but our yachts are, the earlier presentations presented, we're leaning a little bit more to not just scale, but actually have the ability to race and compete. So this is a slide which shows a picture of a print of Benjamin Franklin, and he's testing a theory. When he was in Holland, he actually thought he saw that draft forces had a harder time pulling barges when the barges were in the shallow end of a canal. And so basically he came back to the Americas and tested this out. And the way he tested it was he had a model boat. You know, now it doesn't have a lot of sail area, it doesn't have a lot of displacement, but it's kind of the first picture we could come across in which somebody is actually using a model of a boat for something besides sailing in a big boat. And here he's testing a theory. He proved it out, but it's kind of the first picture we have of somebody using a model boat. Then around the mid-1800s, we have this print in which you can see here that there's actually a model yacht here. They're sailing it from a dinghy. I think this over here looks like it might be, it doesn't have a sail on it, but I think it's another boat. And so this is around in Great Britain around 1851, and now people are showing some interest in developing these models. They look very scale, and clearly they float. They sail, but they don't radio control them, and they have to run around and chase them in boats. In the mid-1800s, there were some occasional contests, but basically it was just between the United States and Britain, and things hadn't really caught on. In the late 1800s, some of the first model yachting clubs began to appear. This is a picture of Prospect Park, as you can see in Brooklyn, and basically it was just, you can see the model here off the pier, and it's just a large park in which people could get out there and sail around. But it was kind of the first start of a club that appeared. Then people started building specialized ponds for model yachting. And here you can see Spreckles Lake in San Francisco, where I first saw model yacht sailing. It's a wonderful venue. And then later on, we had the Central Park Lake, the conservatory waters at Central Park, which were used for model yachting. And again, these both came into existence around in mid to late 1800s. Then in 1898, San Francisco Model Yacht Club came onto the scene. And this is thought to be one of the oldest model yachting organizations. And here you can see some of the early boats. I certainly don't know the classes of these. But it was a bunch of people getting together with a common interest in model yachting who would build and sail and talk and design and keep and kind of promote the hobby.
And where they're tied to the lake.
Pardon me?
And where they're tied to the lake.
Right. Okay, then in the 1900s, around in December, the Central Park Model Yacht Club was formed. I don't know how many people have sailed here. It certainly doesn't look like this now, but it's a wonderful lake. It has many more trees on both sides. I thought, when I sailed it, I thought I was going to be clever, and everybody else was sailing around the edge, and I didn't know why, and I thought I was going to be clever and sail down the middle. And what I found out was there's no wind in the middle because of the trees. It all blows around the edges. So everybody else was up the pond and back, while I was still kind of plodding along in the middle. So we live and learn. But the group that met, it was small, and of course they were located in the conservatory waters, but it was a start, and certainly it was a large city in which they got a lot of notoriety. And they wanted to encourage people to take up the sport, and they were very successful. Jeez. As you can see, here's another picture of Central Park, and you can see all the people now up on the slopes, gathered around watching these yachts in the middle. People were getting interested, young people were getting interested, parents supported it because it's a good activity for the kids to get them out of the house. And here we have an article that says 5,000 sea model boats spy in the park, father and son races featured. I would have liked to have been there. I bet it was interesting. But I like to believe this is kind of what it was like back then, just crowds and crowds of people. If only we could get some of those crowds now to attend our events, you know, but certainly this was new.
They broke off the wind.
Pardon me?
They blocked the good wind.
Yeah, well, they didn't have as many trees in, so they probably had a lot of good wind that I didn't see. So, these yacht clubs, however, weren't necessarily confined to the large cities. This slide here shows that the Bennett Yacht Club, and this is, whoops, you can go back. Bennett Yacht Club, in which this Cameron Forbes talked to his great uncle about forming this yacht club. And this yacht club was on Nashua Island off of Massachusetts. So it's a little tiny yacht club. It wasn't just in the big cities that were getting interested. In the small islands where people, one person usually would get interested in it and then start something, and then other people would join in. And this is how most clubs are formed these days, with one person who has an interest and he finds somebody else, and these things build and people come out, and eventually you have 66 boats showing up in Pennsylvania to hold up any yacht regatta. In the late 1800s, again, the public was gaining interest because all these little clubs that were forming. Sport was in full swing, of course, in New York City, and there was actually a New York Times article which reported on miniature yachting in Central Park. At this time, also, international interest was gaining. It seems like, of course, anytime there's two boats close to each other, they're racing. It's true about countries, I suppose. We were only separated by an ocean, and yet we were interested in seeing if anybody across the pond could build a boat and sail as fast as we did. So this here was a picture from the Scottish Model Yachting Association. And in 1908, there were 8 clubs in Scotland at the time, and they actually had the first national model yachting association in the world. Again, big boats, interesting venues. The first U.S. national organization was in the early 1900s, in which America was invited to participate in this international race. And they formed the Model Yacht Racing Association of America. There were other clubs that were brought into this organization as it grew. And again, this is this to me looks like San Francisco, or a picture of San Francisco, I can't tell for sure. But again, I like the yacht, I like the sail. Hello. Oh, it's back.
Back.
Okay.
Chuck,
It's okay.
go back. Not quite the same. Chuck is back.
Oh, I see it, it just needs to.
Sparkles, no one out in the presentation. That's Sparkles?
No, that's New York City.
Second?
Is it New York?
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
because that's the early, the, right above the boat on the left, that's, Krebs Boathouse before.
Oh, there, okay.
Further down.
But again, I like the fact that they were looking for scale. You know, they were looking for sail plans that matched the big boats. They were sailing together. I don't know if these people were racing or not, but they're all dressed in their sunny go-to-meeting clothes.
They probably were racing because the early racing was handicapped.
Oh, was it? For
So we
different
ran a
boat
couple
types?
of races and everybody got a factor, and that's how they scored.
That's great. And here you can see, and again, with the, with this group, this was part of the Model Yacht Racing. They had three divisions when they formed. They had the Eastern, Midwestern, and Pacific divisions, and eventually they had over 50 clubs by the 1930s. So it was a very growing organization at the time. Okay, so now we start racing, and of course, if you're racing, everybody wants to know how they can beat the other person, and everybody has, as John implied, there's differences between these boats and different sets of skills. And so what they want to do now is establish some uniform rules for racing. And the Model Yachting, I had to ask John this, the Model Yacht Racing Union of North America rules were adopted, and they followed the practices of the big yachts of the day. And basically, the boats were grouped into classes according to the length of the waterline. They applied a handicap based on the square root of the sail area, another one of our lectures earlier. And the boats ranged from 48 inches to 72 inches in hull length, plus the bowsprit. Thank goodness we don't do that for a schooner, right? And they carried 1,500 to 3,000 square inches of sail area. And so they had to have these groups, of course, to make the sailing and racing competitive. That's your hand, yes?
Yeah, back in 1900, how did they control these boats in a race?
They were free sailors at the time.
Okay.
Or they skiff sailed them. You know, there's a couple of ways, we'll talk about that in a second. They free sailed or skiff sailed them. They hadn't yet come up with vane steering. Now, so this is a picture of the late 1890s. 1890. The handicaps existed. Here's again pictures of people in skiffs chasing down their boats. I guess this is their boathouse over here and their dock. So here it shows that this picture in particular is showing that skippers control the boats from skiffs. The races were run on a triangular course, and if you were in a skiff chasing the boat, there was a 5-second penalty if you touched your boat. So you could roll on beside it and I guess blow wind in the sails, but you couldn't touch it. If you touched it, you were 5 seconds were added, and of course this last time was then added to the full time. And I don't know, I'd be interested in knowing, I suppose what they had to do was at some point they had to turn it by hand around the triangular course to get the sail, but anytime you did, you got a 5-second penalty. Everybody got it, so it wasn't that bad. Herbie?
On my pond boat that was skiff sailed, there was a cribbage board on the deck. And your sheets are attached to the pins. And you just move the pin in the hole, you wanna readjust your sail.
But you had to touch the boat to do that, to get it to go in a different direction,
That's
yeah.
The system they use.
And
Say
Herb,
again?
Herb, does that have a real deep keel?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Does it have a real
Wait a
deep
second.
keel? Your skiff sailboat, does it have a real deep keel?
Real deep keel.
No,
Because usually they did, because
Yeah.
they carried so much more sail.
They carried a lot of sail and they just needed to really go straight.
But
And-
a
and
cribbage board is another good indicator that it's a
Well,
skiff
I
sail.
just remember, anybody remember Balmain bugs? You know, the hull was about that long and they had like 1,000 square inches of sail, you know, and they were huge, but they had long, heavy keels that they could slide backwards and forwards depending on the wind. Those must have been interesting. Sir,
How did they keep the skiffs from interfering with the other boats?
I don't know that they did. I think that was just probably part of the challenge.
5-second penalty for touching your boat.
Yeah, because anybody else does it, it's like, I don't know.
What do you do to the guy who's leading? Oops.
Oh, sorry, I bumped into your boat with my skiff. So, again, a little bit about skiff sailing here, and skiff sailing, we talk about it like everybody knows, but it just is a great picture. It's just a bunch of people in skiffs trying to chase down and help control their boats around the course. Lots of sail, you know, relative to the length of a water line. And I don't know if you're in this mess in a skiff, how you stay out of other people's way. But this was skiff sailing, and I have to admit, it kind of looks fun. And where's Kent? Don't they have a river race with the race DC-12s? And from boats?
In Oxford and Maryland, right? We chase them around and see oxes and parkers and.
J-boats, isn't it?
Do you get 5-second penalties if you touch the boat?
No, there was one thing where you could go and find, it was a bottle of rum or something attached to a buoy and.
Nobody told me about
Points
this.
for finding that.
John,
Skiff sailing was a northeast phenomenon.
was it?
Yeah, it was New York Harbor, Boston Harbor, and up in Maine, Cape Porpoise.
Uh-huh.
There are only 4 or 5 places, but it was pretty much northeast where they did.
I can see that.
In Spring Lake, they started their club with the double enders with skiff sailing, and that's why they went to a fiberglass hull, because they had to build the skiffs, and they had to build the boats in a short time. So when the club first started, that's how they started, and then they switched to radius.
So you have to be really committed if you're gonna sail on a yacht during this period.
Some of the skiffs that I've seen pictures of, I wouldn't want to get out.
Yeah.
They were really very basic.
Yeah, they just look like 2 planks curved around a flat bottom with a pointy, a pointier end and a duller end.
No.
Okay, now we talked about early technology in terms of making sailboats controllable, and this was an early steering vane by Kershaw. And of course, he innovated a lot of stuff, and as all true inventors or inventions go, it didn't catch on right away. It was probably too much technology for what people were used to using back then, and nobody had the skill sets or the interest in actually doing this level of involvement in managing their boats. There were publications that talked to these things. This one by Biddle was called A True State on Construction, Rigging, Handling of Model Yachts, Ships, and Steamers with Remarks on Cruising, yada, 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 yada. But these books were essential at the time if you were going to get involved in model yachting. Certainly they didn't have the internet to look things up, and word of mouth was possible, but again, not everybody had access to somebody who was knowledgeable, and if they wanted to start something, they had to get a book. I guess this is now republished by something called Forgotten Books. I haven't seen it in 2018, at least in England. I don't know if it's made it across the pond yet, but so these books, these old books that are classics, are being republished because, of course, the interest in model yachting exists now. Maybe not as much as it did in those times, but it's certainly growing. There was innovation taking place in early model yachts. These are early catamarans. This is Amaryllis by Nate Herreshoff. And these over here were from the 30s and 40s. And, you know, they're very innovative. They're catamarans. I don't, if you go to there's one of these, this is probably at the Herreshoff Museum, if you ever get up into New England and get to go by. It's hanging up somewhere in the loft in the museum, you can see it. And I don't know if they had any really big catamarans in these days, but certainly the people in model yachting were thinking, well, maybe I can run with 2 hulls and less weight, and now with this much sail, I can probably get some speed going here.
Funny story,
Yeah.
Herreshoff's Amaryllis, he took it from Bristol to race with the New York Model Yacht Club. It was so successful, they changed the rules to exclude the boat.
Multi-hulls, include multi-hulls, probably. Yeah. Okay. Now, you may think this is a modern or a washing machine from the 1800s, but no, this is a radio control boat. Now, it was primitive by our standard. Nikolai Tesla, I don't know if you've ever been to the Museum of Science in Boston, but if you go to the Tesla exhibit, because they have like a 1,000,000-watt generator, Tesla generator that creates lightning all through this thing. But he was very innovative for the time. He advocated a lot of things having to do with electricity, and one of the things he was trying to do was build a radio control. This was his boat. It looks like a big wash tub. There's the rudder. Here's this antenna. And so he was able to maneuver this with his rudder. He was able to flash his running lights without any visible connection. So people were amazed, as they should have been for that time. But it's crude, didn't really catch on for the time, but it was it foretold the things to come. Also now in the 1800s and mid 1900s, here we start development of vane gears and brain gears to control model yachts. Here's several examples of them. I'm not going to, it's beyond the scope of my talk here or my knowledge to really tell you how these work, but there's a lot of people now that are, at this particular time, that are coming up with these quadrant gears and brain gears to steer boats. Again, it's not radio control, but now all of a sudden, the boats can follow the wind with these sails that move with the wind and move the tiller. This is the simplest one, you can see it. This moves right to left or port to starboard, and when it moves port to starboard, there's a little tiller arm here that connects to the rudder and steers the boat with the wind. Here's another one, the Herreshoff vane, again. Here's a more complex drawing of the Norway, what's his name, Sam Berg of Norway. Very, very complex. I'm sure it looks fine. But it's just showing you the development of these steering mechanisms that are taking place now in the early 1900s. I actually have, I mean, these are wonderful things. They're pieces of art, in my opinion, on the back of these boats when people have the street sailing events with these train gears. We have somebody in our club now that actually prints these on 3D printers. They're not shiny and brass, but they work very well. And I mean, that's how, you know, it's not new technology, but the technology we have today, we're able to innovate a little bit more.
Newer batteries.
Yeah, but yeah, they don't run down. But I understand it's a talent to trim these as well, though. Okay, here's some examples of the steering mechanisms. Again, as it says, more complex than the original Herreshoffs. Now here's Francis Herreshoff. You know, he did build some models, but basically he built models as patterns for big boats. I mean, big boats were his trade, and he built half hulls. If you go to the Hertschaft Museum, you'll see walls and walls and walls of half hulls that he built. And as was talked about earlier, the job, when he wanted a boat built, he went to his building yachts foreman and said, here, I want this boat built in 30 feet, on a 30-foot length. And this poor guy had to take this little model and loft it, as they're talking about, on the floor from these little models to a big boat. This happens to be him establishing a 450 class model, and I think, Rick, you said you had a 450 class, just got one, so there's one around if you want to look at it. Here's another picture of his museum. You can see all the half hulls that he designed, which probably ultimately turned out to be big boats if they were built, but they're everywhere. And he had this little tool that he used to take to build the offsets for the he used that to determine the offsets for any given hull he had. This tool is still in existence, and it's demonstrated every once in a while if you talk to his grandson. There was a reference earlier to scheme designs, and again, this is talking about people who are now into designing model yachts. They're focused on what concepts and technology and thought processes have to go into making hulls that are saleable and raceable in a small package, and London Steam was one of these people. And here's his plans for a 22-inch model that was published back in the 1930s. And here's all of the elements of those designs that were talked about earlier. The first M-class boat was here in the 1930s at Royal Club. It was Commodore of the Marblehead Model Yacht Club. And here is a picture of him with his Marblehead. Notice the insignia. So this is grew into, at the time, one of the largest classes in the U.S. And he wanted, the story goes, he wanted a class of boats that was actually able to fit in people's cars, that were bigger, but not so big you couldn't transport it, because he wanted to be able to transport his boat to different ponds and stuff like that. And so he came up with this 5800 design. The 50 inches was the hull length, the 800 was the sail area, the sails area, and at one time there were 1,000 of these boats registered in the U.S. 1930. So then we have to look at now to see what the international racing scene looked like. Now they weren't racing so much Marbleheads internationally as they were A-boats. Wasn't there an A-boat on the pond yesterday? You're A-boat. Yeah. Aren't you in here somewhere? No. So at this time, they're racing A-boats internationally, and here you can see a regatta, and it was open to all countries, I guess, but at this, as usual, the Great Britain and the United States were the countries that were most often found in competition. Here. And this is just talking to the point that people liked it because you can see a steering gear here. People liked it because it was easy to get into. It was something to do with your family. It was relaxing, and it wasn't too expensive.
Look at the Spinnaker.
Yeah.
Boat just completed a run.
He's probably trying to keep it from banging into the wall there.
Now this kind of racing, the free sailing, you touch the boat every time it had to turn or start a direction. So if you were running, you were at the far end of the pond, you set the boat up, you let it go. The steering mechanism kept it going straight. If you were on a tack, you gotta have somebody on the other side of the pond, you gotta have a mate, or you gotta run like that.
You were where the boat was gonna be.
Because you were there with a turning pole, and as it got to that side, you would turn it back in the other direction.
So as we progress and get into more modern times, I think, because I know about the Detroit Model Yachting Club, and school programs now started to use model yachting as a means of teaching people skills and crafts, and so they use model yachts as tools to teach working with wood and metal and cloth and things like that. The most famous is the Detroit School program. I don't know if it's still in effect anymore, but with some of the,
I think it went out, it stopped, being in vogue in 2005.
yeah, which is unfortunate. But I know Rick is working with a group of people from,
Nashville.
well, Nashville, was it YMCA or Y?
Boys and Girls Club.
Boys and Girls Club.
The Chico was one of the boats.
Chico was one of the boats. So
It's the boat in the drawings.
it's not as prevalent as it was, but maybe it's gonna come back and get kids interested again, because certainly it's a fun activity, I think. And it does require a lot of skills that I think are useful, for the honeydew list that we all will have later on in life. Okay, so our first true sailboat was developed by this guy, Henry Packard, who was a PhD guy out of Harvard. And now, and here's his boat. That's what it looked like. Here's a side view of it, and I like the receiver here. See the tubes, the vacuum tubes up here. Here's his water line here. Here's his here's his battery here. Here's his servos to make everything go. So, and it's a schooner, so it can sail. So but this is 1934, not that long ago, but it was truly a RC sailboat that could be controlled very well.
Look at this transmitter.
Remotely.
Look at the transmitter.
Look at this transmitter out on the ground there next to him on his leg.
Right here, it's a big box with a big antenna on it and knobs, probably. Okay, so one of the other things that things that happen through our history that kind of contribute unknowingly is the Works Project Administration of the Roosevelt area to put people back to work or to work, and those funds were often or sometimes used to build these ponds in urban areas throughout the United States for model yachting. I don't know where this is from. This might be in Spreckles. But no, Spreckles built that one, so it wasn't WPA class.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure where it's
I'm not
from.
sure where it's from.
But I think it's interesting that they did it. I know one of the reasons why was that Franklin Roosevelt, Delano Roosevelt himself was an enthusiast of model yachting. Here you can see a picture of him with his family, and I guess he skiff sailed 36s on the Hudson River at that time. So, but I think that had a lot to do with keeping the model yachting moving forward and growing. This picture is amazing to me because you don't think so much of model yachting as being present on the geopolitical scene, but here we are in Germany where they held their first international M-class race. You can see that Nazi Germany was hosting this Olympics, and yet they had a demonstration sail of marbleheads in Berlin.
And John Black won.
And John Black won, which is John Black won with his Cheerio 1, and this is a picture of him with his boat. Of course, he then went on to build Cheerio 2 and Cheerio 3, all of which were successful in their various competitions, both in the U.S. and internationally. Now the San Francisco Yacht Club kind of popped back up on the scene. In 1937, San Francisco actually contributed the funds for them to build a clubhouse on Spreckles Lake. I don't know if any of you have ever been to San Francisco, but it's a wonderful clubhouse. It looks very 30s in its construction, and it's full of pre-sale boats and vane control boats.
They're the only club in the United States that still actively every week sells resale boats.
Yeah.
San Diego has one too.
Do they now? Yeah.
Who does?
San Diego also sells, regularly
Do they?
sells.
When I first got into model yachting, you couldn't build a boat unless you had this catalog from Fisher. It had anything and everything you would need to build a big boat. None of them were light or particularly fancy, but they're very, very functional. And at this time, almost nobody else really made model yacht fittings of any quality or any quantity. In the mid-1900s now, model yachting enjoyed a resurgence with World War II, but it never really gained the popularity that it had pre-war, unfortunately. So by the mid-1900s, we were basically sailing three principal classes: the M's, the traditional A boats here, M's, A's, and the X class. I don't know that I've ever seen an X class. I don't think we have one here, but they were, that's what was going on after the war. In Marblehead, they did have a guy who was innovating, Bill Bethel. They're going to have a race in Marblehead on the 23rd of October called the Bethel Cup, which is in celebration of him and his accomplishments. And at this time, he was building international A-boats, and they were sailing, I guess, a monthly cup at that time, and he was the world champion. Then we have Gus Lassell, who was a real innovator, and as you can see that they had a finless, thin-keeled boat, which must have been very, very successful because they made a rule with bend it. Didn't you have a boat, Jim, a small boat like this?
Yeah, Hal Robinson made one.
Did he?
And I had one, I had his boat, it's an amazing thing.
And you know, model yachting needed people at this time who were able to explore different ideas and different concepts. And it's unfortunate that they wrote rules to eliminate them as opposed to like creating a class to include them or something, because it would be, I think it'd be fun to see these boats underwater and see how well they sail. Now, at this time, oops, let me back up. At this time, they also came up with something called a sliding rig, in which the main, you can see, sits on a track and is stabilized by these rails on either side. And you can see back here the swivel for the mast slides on a rail as well. So you can balance the boat by moving the rig on this. Now I know that Rick has a boat it's in the boathouse, I think, right now, that actually has, I don't know if he has a sliding rig, but he has the rails and stuff on it that were originally present. And so you can go take a look at that if you'd like to.
Jim has a comment over here, Cliff.
Pardon me?
Jim.
I have a couple of those.
Do you?
And they're not used in pre-sailing necessarily to balance the boat. It's when you go up, you set it in one position, and when you're going downwind,
Okay.
you move the split sail forward, the whole rig forward, and it takes it out. It works a lot better on a vane boat than,
Okay, man, well, this looks like it probably has a vein up here, so.
yeah.
So,
I only get to sail vane boats once a year. But if it's really
So, you know, we kind of mosey back to the Central Park Model Yacht Club right now because they had a fire in 1952. And so they, the Krebs family, Jeannie Krebs, actually donated the money for them to build a brand new clubhouse on Central Park. And again, much like the San Francisco Park, if you get to go here and sail, you walk in, they don't have as many old free sailors, but they have a lot of marbleheads. They like to race a lot of IOMs in this club.
They lost a lot of good boats.
They what?
They lost.
Well, a lot of good boats in the fire, I can imagine.
Boats that are historical.
Now, I certainly remember when radio controllers looked like this.
I got one.
Yeah, Jim probably has a couple. And, you know, and these evolved, as you all know, over time to where we have now, where you can get all sorts of telemetry through these things. And so there's really no limit at this particular point. It's just a matter of weight on the boat and money you're willing to pay for a transmitter to go there. We also have advances in materials. This is a modern M, deep fin, Kevlar, carbon fiber. There's all sorts of materials now that are not very classic or vintage, but they're certainly very functional when building a boat. In the 1970s, the AMYA, American Model Yachting Association, was founded, and there are several people, the famous 9 associated with them, and here's the names of the people that kind of helped found and push forward the AMYA. The AMYA also publishes a magazine called Model Yachting. The first magazines came out with memberships for them. What's the point of having a magazine if you don't have anybody that's willing to buy one from you? So they had magazines, they had memberships. Dues were only $2.50. They're what, $30-something now. You got a quarterly newsletter, a patch, and a membership card, and a copy of the Constitution. The U.S. Vintage Model Yacht Group was formed in 1994. And of course, what important thing isn't settled or founded or talked about over dinner? And this is no exception. I guess Russell Potts, the president of the Vintage Organization, was present, and they talked about establishing this Vintage Model Yacht Group. And it took place at the Boston Yacht Club in Marblehead. I guess that's the Boston Yacht Club in Marblehead.
In Hull.
It was in Hull? It was in Hull.
It's in Hull.
Now this is, I didn't get to attend this, but this is the U.S. Navy Model Yacht Group Nationals in 2014. You can all look for your pictures in there that attended. I know Herb's in there somewhere. All of our vintage model yacht clubs that attended during those years. In 2018, it was reorganized. We have a new logo, and we have a journal that comes out quarterly. And the organizers of the original organizers of the Vintage Model Yacht Club you may recognize John Snow, Earl Bobert, Tom McLaughlin, Harry Mote, of course we all know Alan Sedan. If you go to the website, just talk a little about the U.S. Vintage Model Yacht Group. If you go to the website, there's news, there's events, you can join. They have a history of model yachting. They have plans for boats that you can buy, the various classes. This is a map showing the organization of it in the different regions throughout the states. And today's models are quite interesting. They go from some of the biggest to some of the smallest in this little footing here. So they're showing J's here and the footing there. And the Vintage Model Yacht Group has 7 classes of the older boats that they sail. And many of these date back to the early 1930s. So, questions? Sir?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in publications, or, you know, if somebody has a classic library of books concerning this.
Well, that's a good question.
What was the question again?
He's interested in publications of old boats. and
On the
whether-
Vintage website, we have listed the titles of all of the books, all of the older books relative to model yacht.
They're still in publication?
No, but if you dig, you might be able to find it.
And I think part of
Whose website?
that is kind of the after lunch topic that he wants to talk about in terms of the building project that he's kind of pushing forward is because we need these older publications. If they're still in print, we need to find them and make sure they're in our library. If they're reprinted, we need to find them and make sure they're in our library. If people have them in their attics or in their basements or whatever, we need to find them and make sure they're in our library. And plus he has 1,000 or so file cabinets full of stuff that people have contributed that needs to have a home.
Over the
people-
last 10 years, I found almost every title on Amazon or ABE Books. Some have come from overseas, but it may not come up in a search, but in a month it might. So just
Yeah.
have to keep
So,
that.
and we need to archive this stuff. I mean, we have a lot of material that people have gathered over the years and contributed, and we need to find a home besides John.
And that's what's gonna be talked about at 2:30.
Besides John's basement or garage or wherever you have it.
So John has a
Yeah,
physical,
so if you need information, don't call me.
Or Earl.
Or Earl.
but there is a physical collection at this point?
And we're building one. One is being built, I should say. One is being built, and John's kind of,
It's more of a storage thing right now.
Yeah, right,
But eventually, well, we'll talk about it
we'll
2:30.
talk about it.
thank you.
Other questions? Thank you very much. Oh, well, sir.
2 comments, I actually still have one of those packages from the 70s.
Do you?
So I'm gonna bring that Sunday. I wasn't one of the original 9, I was one of the original 2047. That's how quickly it grew. I joined in 1976, so they had over almost 2,100 members by that time. The second thing is something that's sort of carried us from what went on all the way up to World War II and shortly thereafter, and we had that little bit of lapse. But what really sort of vaulted model yachting back, we had a supplier and a manufacturer down in Florida that hopefully we're getting ready to do an article and a story about, and that's John Reynolds, Reynolds Manufacturing Company. He made about 17 or 18 different types of boats. He had all kinds of molds, and he sold A.J. Fisher fittings, and his wife Mary made the sails. And I had a lot of conversations with him. He was a really interesting fellow to talk to. When I was younger, I thought, well, this would be the coolest job on earth to ever have, doing what he did.
And there you have it.
But but I think that, he definitely needs to be, we need to put him in our, when we start mentioning about milestones, because he definitely was able to get it to the point where now Ramus is sort of taking over what he did.
Well, it's been my experience in anything, in any business, in any hobby, and in any endeavor, there's individuals, single individuals make a difference. Without these people that are kind of ahead of their time in terms of how they think and where they're going, and they see the end game. It may not be in their grasp, but they're working their way towards it all through their life and stuff. And people are willing to join into that vision, and even if they don't see it, they're willing to follow along with it. And so there's a lot of people that that's why I say this wasn't intended to be all inclusive, because heaven knows there's going to be somebody out who who was important in that time, but it's worth knowing that those people out there existed, and we're better off today because they did. And we need to find more of those people to kind of take us into the next
Yeah,
step.
I still have all the mimeographed the sheets of the types of boats that he had, and I've got a big collection of his stuff. I guess I'm probably the only manufacturing museum that is around, but
Scott, if you send us an email, give us some dates, we can add it to this PowerPoint. And
it's
then-
definitely really very interesting
You
stuff.
promised to do some writing on this too.
Yeah, but you know, I end up writing.
Yeah, you know, if you talk about it, you gotta write it.
So
Gotta be careful with that, because we'll put the pinch on.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everybody, thank you.
Right, over to the lake, lunch over there, get boats out of the shed,